Okay, we are live, I think. I'm still looking at my YouTube thing. Cool. Yeah, we're live. Sweet. Switching my camera. Hi there. Hope you're doing well today. Happy Friday. It is 9:12 a.m. here in Toronto. It's cold, but it's fine. So today we are going to be taking a look at how to refactor React components. I mean, refactor is a loaded word in a way, and especially in the world of React with how things are moving, with 16.8.4 coming out with hooks and so on. Um, I'm not going to get into that. So more recently, the tutorials that you see online for refactoring involve rewriting everything to use hooks or to leverage the latest context stuff, or to leverage the latest React 16 APIs, like what is it? The context stuff, or also like derived state from props, all that stuff. I feel like for this one, I'm more going to talk about the kind of smells that you can see when you're developing React components, and how you maybe go about thinking like where the responsibilities of that code should go and how you make your splits. Because I feel like that is actually more important than using the latest and greatest technologies, because the latest and greatest technologies are a tool, but knowing how to make your splits, that's more of like a technique. And it comes with experience, and yeah, I feel like that's a little bit more important. So let's jump to this code here. Great. So what you're taking a look at right now is the avatar component from HSDS React. So right off the bat, how a component for a library is constructed is very different compared to how a component would be constructed if it were in an application. Typically, the ones that come from libraries have to take care of a lot of use cases. That's why when you plop them into the application, it's just like, oh, it's just so easy to use. I just use a single component, give it some props, and everything works magically. That magic happens somewhere. That complexity happens somewhere. It's just not in your application anymore. It's inside the component code. So with that said, most of the components within HSDS React are quite okay. Avatar, it's fine. It's a little bit on the big side. So today we're going to take a look at how we might go about refactoring this thing. So the first thing I take a look at is just like the general file size relative to what this thing is. This thing is, it renders a circle with an image in it. And if the image is not available, then it'll render some text. That's all this thing is. This thing is also 300 something lines of code, which compared to, I mean, depending on what kind of programming language you're used to, it might be fine. But for me, this is a lot bigger than, I feel like it's a lot bigger than it needs to be. So the first thing I take a look at is the render method. Right now, I see some destructuring stuff. That's not that bad. This could be moved to another spot, and this is something that we've started to do within HSDS React, which is quite nice. So this is not that bad. The thing that jumps out to me is this part. This part where we're rendering, it looks like several slices of stuff within this avatar UI. And this has actually been recently, not recently, but refactored. When did I do this? Several months ago. This was refactored several months ago, and I can tell because it's a TypeScript file. So generally within HSDS React, TypeScript files are newer. But I remember when I did this refactor, I didn't overhaul it. I just kind of converted it to TypeScript, kept the same kind of logic, but moved some things around in order for me to do what I needed to do. I didn't overhaul this thing. So today, I mean, I don't know if we'll overhaul this thing today, but we'll take a look at it to see what we can do and kind of describe the kind of my thinking behind like what should happen. Okay, render crop. What does a crop do? Let's see. Crop. It plucks some shadow thing from the props. It gets the content somehow, fine. Gets the style somehow, provides some classes, and now it renders some prop UI. So this looks like it's a very independent thing. Status, let's see what status does. Right, it plucks some properties, it generates some class names, and it renders given a certain condition with some stuff. So yeah, again, so it looks like each one of these render methods, bits, are responsible for rendering maybe a separate chunk of UI within Avatar. So anytime you have something like this happening, the easiest, the simplest thing you can do to refactor is literally create a subcomponent that does this, that does exactly this. And all you have to do at this point is, from your main component, pass in these properties and it'll figure out the rest. This is really great because now you have literally a separate piece of code being a component that you can test in isolation. Makes it way easier to test. It keeps this initial entry point code cleaner, and it's just way nicer, man. If you did it that way. And the thing that inspired today's live stream was a pairing session I had with Brett, which was a really good one. And we were working through some bit of code, and I was just basically helping him refactor some stuff, giving him some tips, exactly what I'm sharing now. I thought that was quite valuable, which is why I'm doing this today. Great. So let us do this. So how would I say create a status component? So given this is a component library, what I would do is I would create a new file, call it avatar.status, because that's what it is, .tsx. And this, basically, I'm going to increase the font size for you. I apologize. Oh, geez. Every day, something it's not perfect. It's fine. So import star from React. What? As React from React. Sorry. Apologize. So what do I need to do? I need to render some stuff, given I need to render basically all this. So I need some UI, I need status dot, and I need status UI. Where do they come from? Status dot comes from here. So I'm just going to copy that. Status UI comes from here. I'm going to copy that. Okay. So I need to give this a name. Const avatar status. So here is a very interesting thing. Already several decisions have been made just by doing this. Not counting the decision of splitting it into a subcomponent. What I'm talking about is, do I make this a stateless functional component, or do I do this? Or do I do this? And if you're newer or new to React, there is a very big difference between all these three, even with the latest and greatest React 16 stuff. I'll talk about it now. Great. So the easiest and most consistent thing you can do, I think, within the React ecosystem is to use something that looks like this. You're extending the class component, you're rendering something out. So the reason for this is because this component has built-in life cycles, and anytime the properties that you give it change. So let's pretend we render this out to look like this. Right. And then you have some props that you give it. What theme should we go with today? I like Napoleon Dynamite. Let's do that. So if you say Uncle Rico throws football. This is fun. Okay, so if you say Uncle Rico throws football, this property gets passed to the component. And anytime any of these properties change, this has to go through some sort of reconcile process in order to figure out whether it should re-render or not. If the properties are flat, which are strings, it's easy because now I can test what, like literally an A equal B test for football versus footballs. Great, something has changed and it'll do its thing. However, if you give it a really nested property, whether that's an object, deeply nested object, or an array, that kind of comparative operation becomes a little bit more expensive, takes some more time. And React component does a deep comparison between the two. So you get the results you get are a little bit more accurate in terms of when something should re-render, but the cost is that it takes more time to do the comparison. Pure component, on the other hand, pure components, they do a shallow comparison. So if you happen to have const, say, Uncle Rico, let's see. So there's a scene in Napoleon Dynamite where he like cleans chickens. So chickens cleaned, right? So we have an array, and then we give chickens clean to Napoleon. To Napoleon. Right, so that is the same object, right? So if you happen to manipulate or mutate this object somehow, like I'm gonna call this chicken little guy. So if we mutate this array like this, there would be no difference between previous and next, because when you do a shallow comparison between that and that, it's literally the same object. It's just the contents of it's changed. So for certain things like this, pure component may not re-render. However, because it does a shallow comparison, this is wicked fast compared to this one. And because of that, a lot of libraries like React Redux, styled components, maybe React Redux for sure. When you use that connect method, like that, that connect higher order, like this, what's happening is that they're wrapping this, like the component that you're passing in, which may be this one. The thing that's generating is literally a component that looks like this, with connect avatar status, and then your component like this. So the output of this particular higher order function is basically a wrapped component around yours. And this wrapped component is typically a pure component, just because of the performance reasons, like we talked about. And they give you that out of the hood. And there is a way, I think, to override it, at least in the libraries that I've worked on, where you say this is from Redux, which is sort of like a React Redux equivalent, but happens to be slightly smaller. You could specify, you have your map state to props. You have your map dispatch to props, and then you have maybe some options thing here. You can specify whether you want something to render as a pure component or not. You can also do this with the styled function that comes from Help Scout Fancy, which is the CSS and JavaScript library I wrote. So you can specify your selector here, you write your styles here, and then by default, Fancy will render a pure component, but you can make it render an actual component by doing pure false. Yeah, so that is the decision. Oh, last one. This is a stateless functional component. This does not do any prop diffing whatsoever. So this re-renders all the time. So in terms of accuracy of your UI reflecting your most current props and states and all that kind of stuff, this one is the best. And in terms of code weight, this one's also the best because you don't need to do a lot of boilerplate setup stuff. However, in terms of performance, this one is arguably the worst because it doesn't do the diffing, so it just re-renders all the time. So with React 16, you get Reactive Memo. And what that does is if you had a stateless functional component, or SFC, sometimes that's referred to that, you would pass it through React Memo, and then you would export that instead or something. So export default React Memo of your avatar status. And this does the shallow comparison, the A to B comparison of your properties, very similarly to React Peer Component. Underneath the hood in React 16, they do something a little bit different. They don't actually use a peer component. They have their own kind of comparison methods, which you can actually do, pass your own. So the second argument for React Memo is your shallow comparison function. And you can customize that however it is you want, which is kind of nice. But yeah, so those are that was the decision that was already made when doing this. And depending on your code base and the conventions you follow, you pick the one that matches your needs the best. So I'm gonna actually go with the stateless functional component because this thing does so little. That's one. It's purely presentational too. And my reason for feeling okay with doing that is because the thing that it renders, which is a status UI, which is a styled component coming from Fancy, though that node within the tree, within the React node tree, that guy is protected with pure component, the pure component comparison thing. So this essentially serves as my higher order wrapper for that particular bit of UI, which is status UI. So with that kind of thinking, I feel okay using an SFC. In the past, the majority of this component library was built using SFCs, stateless functional components, which is fine. That's how I started learning React, and it was around this time where people were like, oh yeah, use stateless functional components everywhere because they are tiny compared to class components. You don't need to think about this and all that kind of stuff. However, the performance of that was awful. This was before React 16. The performance of that was so bad, especially for modals where where there's super nested things and there's so many nodes within the tree and the things are just constantly re-rendering. It was bad, man. So it was then where I was like, all right, I gotta do some research. I did some research. I learned about pure component, and then I started refactoring everything, and that became the convention we followed as a way to protect ourselves. And since the majority, I think, of HSDS React has been converted to pure components, the consuming application using these components are protected at that level. So now that we have like a better environment to control the render flow, given that, plus my understanding of pure components and comparisons, and also the fact that the thing I'm rendering is a pure component, I feel safe rendering a stateless functional component. So this was a long thing, just describing the kind of component that I'm trying to build. However, it's very important, and it's probably a good thing for you to know when making decisions like this. Ideally, I think in React 16 moving forward, maybe the next version of React 16.8 or 16.9 or something, they're making stateless functional components more of a thing, which is great. It keeps the code base lighter. The thing you ship over the air is lighter, which is perfect. However, in terms of render performance, we aren't there yet. And also, depending on your particular code base, you might not be able to use React 16 or even the latest, greatest version of React 16. So those are all the things that you have to consider when refactoring or when you build anything. When it comes to React, at least. Or no, just in general, like all those constraints, all those variables, all the things that you currently have and where you want to go. Important stuff. Great. So we have a avatar status. The thing it gets is props, and since this is TypeScript, we'll say what the props are. Excuse me. Okay. What are the props that I'm trying to receive? I need these things. Okay? Border color. So right now I'm just going to pluck it from whatever we have up here. Border color is a maybe. All right, it's a maybe string. Show status border color. This seems like a Boolean to me. Oh, no commas. Yep. The size is avatar size. Ooh, nice. I have predefined types. That's handy. Where's that coming from? Avatar types. Oh boy, I have a little file too. That's great. So yeah, this is another thing. If you have types that can be shared across components, it's nice to have like a dedicated type file like this, just so that you don't have to rewrite things. It's nice. So now I'm just using avatar size from that. Great, cool. Status icon. This should have types as well, but it's fine. Status icons maybe string, and the status is maybe status.status. Okay, cool. Where's that coming from? Nice, nice. All right, so now we have the props. We're gonna say these are the props that I'm expecting to receive. Thank you. I feel like there's more to this. There's more to it than that. So there is this kind of like computing component class naming thing. I'm gonna add these guys in, don't worry. I'm just gonna see what we have first. So we status icon, we have it. Show status border color, we have it. So I'm gonna pluck those out. Status icon, show status border color. Now those are, from props. Okay, destructuring to pluck those out to render those in. And now I need class names here. Right, that takes care of that. This get shape class name. What is that? Get shape class name. Why did I do this? I guess it's like a convenient thing I did. Yeah, I think I know why. It's because this logic was needed in multiple places. That's why it did it. Okay, fine. So we have an issue now. So we can do two things. One is we can, since this is currently bound to avatar TSX, we can compute it and then pass it through to avatar status when we finish building that component and bringing it in. Or I feel like the better thing to do is to abstract this out into a utility. So now this could be a function, returns a string, and then you give it some props. And for this props, it's basically any, because we don't know what props it's going to receive. And we're going to import, we need class names, so we're going to grab that guy, paste it up here. Cool. Great. So now we have this generically shared function that we can use throughout our avatar code base. So if you have utility functions that are specific to a component, me and my team, we've gone through this a lot of times where we're trying to figure out where to put these things. So I think typically in the past, what you would do is anytime you have utility anythings, it would all be lumped into like a utilities folder, regardless of how specific it is to that particular piece of code that you're writing. This is fine until your code base gets really big, and now you're trying to import some very specific utility, and you got to do something like this. Sticking with Napoleon Dynamite, Pedro. Cut Pedro's hair from, this is a fun utility, from, and then you gotta start doing something like this. Yeah. Even, and like, this has quite a bit of bad feels. It's just very difficult to understand, and also like to get this right, because yeah, there's just too many dot slashes. So if you have a utility that's specific to your bit of component or whatever, keep it locally scoped. Just create a brand new file, name it something that you can easily find and understand. In this case, it's avatar.utils, which is locally scoped to avatar. Directory to file speaking, not JavaScript speaking. And yeah, I understand these are avatar utils. I can grab this guy here and I can share them throughout the avatar code base. Great. Another way to help with this kind of thinking is to just imagine avatar, the folder in isolation, to be a module, like a node module, right? All the bit of code that you need is contained within this avatar folder. That's helped me tremendously in trying to like figure out where things should go, and how code should be shared and written. Great. So now I have this guy that I can now bring into this guy. Import this from avatar utils. Utils. Okay. Great. So now I know that if I instantiate this, giving it the properties, I will get the classes that I want. Perfect. Fantastic. What else is there? Is that it? Avatar status. No, wait. Status something like render status. Here we go. What else is there? If there's a status, render some stuff. Otherwise, don't write anything. Okay, cool. So now we do a return thing, and we have some stuff here. Okay. Component class name, we're passing that through. Status icon, we're passing that through. The size, we'll pluck it out. Oh yeah, here's another thing I can do. Class name. So wherever possible, always extend your class name like this when you're passing it through like that. That way, if you need to, you can customize and add additional class names to your component. This is a very foundational thing that I believe in when it comes to React components. You should be able to use any of them like you would a default HTML selector thing. So whatever you can do in HTML, you should be able to do in React. And giving class names is one of them. With that said, what else do I need to do? With that said, the ..rest spreading is something else that is very handy to help facilitate that ability to use things as like HTML. So people typically, I mean, in my opinion, this is a good pattern to follow. The dangers of that is React can only render a certain set of properties. Otherwise, it's like invalid HTML properties. Because if you gave this thing like cut Pedro hair, avatar status, what's another scene? Are you drinking skim milk because you think you're fat? So there's that scene in Napoleon Dynamite where he asked, I forget her name, but where he asked her this question. So if you were to give this right now to this particular avatar status component, this will get passed through to here, which of course is an invalid HTML attribute, however much I want it to be a real one. But because I've built this in a certain way with Fancy, I know that this stuff gets filtered out. So if you have some sort of filtering mechanism, then it's safe to be able to spread the rest, and you get all the benefits with none of the downsides. The only downside is probably you gotta, at some point in your code, do something that looks like this, where you're passing your rest through here, it validates the properties, accepts all the ones that are valid for React and HTML, rejects everything else, and then gives you an object back, and you can spread that instead. And this comes from React Utils, and this guy powers everything that we have, all the components here that follow that REST spread pattern, including styled components that we use. So it's there. So I feel confident spreading the rest like that. Cool. So there's another decision that we have to make. So here we render this UI depending on whether we have status. Is it up to this component to make that decision? Or should it render all the time, and whether or not this thing should render is up to the parent? So the parent would be like, if status, render status dot, otherwise don't render anything. Typically, I think if you're building more generic components, that decision should be up to the parent. However, because this is a super subtle, this component is a subcomponent that the chances of someone else using it is very, very minimal. I mean, you can because it's available there, but it's minimal. It's an implementation detail that's used to clean up the generic avatar entry point. And because of that rationale, I feel like it is safe to do this, where if there is no status provided, return null, otherwise do this. Right. So this is another thing I like to do. I like to do early returns whenever possible. So even up here, status, alphabetical is very handy. Right. So we have some plucking, and then now we do this. Before we do any of this computational work, we'll just check if status is there. If not, then return it. I like this because when I'm trying to read code and I'm at this point, I'm like, okay, I know where one branch goes. And I'm assuming this is everything else. And that keeps this bit cleaner, because if you were to nest that logic within here, especially if you had multiple kind of if statements, then your code tree thing starts feeling really messy and look like claustrophobic-y, whatever that word. There's got to be a word to describe that. Like, I start feeling like I don't know what's going on here. So by doing early returns like this, I know like where the logic paths are, the splits happen, and I can look at this code as if, like now, if I look at this code, it's like as if nothing happened. And it's great, because now it feels flatter, easier to work with. Cool, so we have that. Show status border color, otherwise undefined. Okay. Const outer border color is this. So here we're like tweaking the sizes that we're giving status dot based on certain criteria, which is fine. Here we have size. We'll just do status dot size is this. So now we're giving it this. Cool. Great. So there is another thing, another little detail. Some folks like to do something that looks like this, which you totally can. I mean, excluding the errors I have right now. You totally can do this. Yeah. Right. The downside of this, in my opinion, is that I feel really anxious when the argument area feels gigantic. And also, if you did something that looks like this, if I need to get the entire prop object, like here, I can't do that. And if you needed to combine this logic with, oh man, if you did this in line, this is like, I give up, man. And if you happen to have fallback properties, this like triple object in this tiny kind of parentheses thing, for me, that's game over. I can't deal with that. So I like this, where I'm saying it's a 1-to-1 ratio of props. These are my types, and maybe these are the default props. Something that looks like that. This is what I prefer. It's clean. But that's just me. You do you. Avatar status, great. So all I have to do right now is return avatar status. So here is another little code design decision that I like. And that is in addition to exporting avatar status as default, I also like to export the cons in isolation. The reason for that is depending on the kind of code base that you work in, you might have a Redux setup or something else, React router or whatever, where you would need to wrap the component in some sort of higher order thing. So it could be a connect, right? Or it could be like a with router setup for React router. So when you do this, let's just stick with connect. So when you export something like this, and you don't have this available, when you go to test it, so let's pretend this is my test avatar status.test.ts. So let's pretend I'm in my test file. And if I import avatar status from avatar status, and I go to write some tests, describe whatever, and then test, and then whatever, and then it's like const wrapper equals mount avatar status does a thing. Right? So when this happens, your jest thing will throw an error. And that's because in order for this to work, you need a provider set up with a store. So now what are you gonna do? Okay, maybe you create like a, I don't know, a const with store wrapper, with store mount equals, and then you fake a provider here, and then you fake a store, and then you wrap you do a lot of messy things in order to just like scaffold this thing for you to test it. And that has bad feels for me. So if you had this kind of setup where you export the connect as whatever, I recommend you also export your component, your bare bones component as is. That way you can pluck only that component unconnected, write your tests like so, and it should pass. No scaffolding, no anything. You're just testing the raw bare bones component, which is nice. And this you can test the connected component as well if you wanted to very easily. It's just the default export, so you can do connected avatar status. And there, you can test both your raw component with unit test very simply, and then you can test the connected bit where the handoff happens between the Redux store and your component. Another thing you can do, when this is a very handy thing, is const map state to props, and then you have some conditions that map state to props. Another nice way to slice it is you can also do this, where you export map state to props, and then in your tests, you can do map state to props. And now, if you feel confident enough, you can test those two bits. And that is literally your entire component. All connect does is that it binds this logic to your component. You don't need to test connect. Connect comes from React Redux. You're fine. Trust the code. They've written tests. It should be good. What you want to test is the transformation of those properties and how those get handed off to your component and how your component handles those specific properties. So by writing something like this, you're able to write tests very simply without having to scaffold anything. So that's really nice. So for this particular component, since I don't have any connection bits happening, it's fine. I'm just going to export this, but I'm going to provide this in isolation as well. And with that, I now have my brand new single responsibility, basically, avatar status thing that renders. And I'm going to bring it into avatar. Import avatar status from avatar status. Great. And now all I'm going to do is do this. Where is it? Render status? Yeah, here. All I gotta do is literally give it. This is literally all I have to do at this point. I can even spread the props if I wanted to. Because the avatar status will only use specific properties and it knows what to do. This is probably bad. You know, you should give it the props that it needs. You're plucking that const avatar props equals this, and then you do avatar props, right? Cool. So now we have this. The logic of this is kind of contained. Yeah, this is a lot cleaner, but I feel like we can do something better. I haven't, I've done some of this in the past, but I'm going to try this now, today. I'm just going to create a higher order. Let's call it with, So the thing I want to construct is basically a higher order function that grabs all the properties and filters out everything that they don't need. Basically a map state to props that passes stuff into avatar status without having to be connected with Redux or anything like that. Sure. So map props, what does it do? It does so it is a function that takes in props. No, it is a function that takes in map props. Naming is so hard. It is a function that okay. It's a function that takes in that and also your wrapped component. Okay, it does this. All this does is by default, okay, all this does is that it renders your wrapped component with this executed. No, that doesn't work yet. It needs this. Cool. So what this does is you can do something like this. Props. You can do a prop filtering kind of thing, essentially. Map props, this. So now you can do this. I only care about these guys. Return this from props. Great. Oops, whoops. Right. So basically abstracting that handoff logic between avatar and avatar status here. So it's all isolated. So I can do something that looks like this. I'm going to probably make this like a more generic function. But if you do something like this, where you have some sort of remapping mechanism, then you can literally just do this at this point. And then you don't need any of this. And then you don't even need this. All you need is that. Great. And basically, at this point, I would repeat the process for the crop border, the outer border, all this stuff. Create subcomponents, give them the appropriate props they need, and let them do their thing. And with that, the avatar UI is a lot more approachable, because given these little slices, I can then take a look at status or crop and see what the heck is even going on. And because these are very simple components, I can say, oh yeah, this just renders a dot, this renders a picture, this renders a thing. And that is how I would go about refactoring something that looks like this with render methods and doing some sort of prop mapping and doing whatever it is there into subcomponents that look like this. And maybe I gotta figure out how to maybe create a generic little util here. This is quite nice. So this actually, I mean, this is available today. You can use it with a library called Recompose. Fun fact: a lot of the principles of Recompose actually made it into React. The guy who worked on Recompose, this guy here, he actually works for the React, Andrew, he works for the React Facebook team now. Yeah, good job, dude. You did good. I'm saying this like I know him. I haven't spoken to him before, but I appreciate his work. So you can do something like here. This is what I built was basically this map props thing. So if you wanted to, you can get it from Recompose. And fun fact, React Memo basically came from this, from Pure. Yeah, the principles of React Memo came from this, and they use the same shallow equal comparator function within React 16. At least the last time I looked, anyway. But yeah, something to think about. Anyway, sidetracking. So, how do we refactor things? When you're looking at your component, and if it does a lot of things, that's a smell. And if your render method is huge, that's also another smell. Alternatively, if you have lots of render methods like this, like sub-render methods that render specific slices of UI, that's a smell. What you can do, the easiest thing you can do is refactor those render slices as individual components. With that, you are able to test those specific bits of UI in isolation, whether that's in Storybook and or in Jest. And that simplifies the logic for your main component a lot. The trickiness here is handling the handoff between this one and your subcomponent. The thing we did today was basically providing it with properties. And one trick that I did was basically filtering out the properties to pluck the ones that I need. Alternatively, what you can do is you can set up some sort of context within your component, context provider, consumer, with the React 16 API or a polyfill of some kind. And your primary component, the entry point, will be the provider, and your subcomponents will be consumers of that. And the consuming components can pluck certain properties it needs in order to render itself out. That's something that you can do as well. Some way to handle the mapping of plucking and only using the specific props you need in order to render essentially a very bare bones component. The last thing you can do to help with testing is I recommend you export your bare bones unconnected component as to make that available to be imported like so. Because then you can write tests for your component without having to worry about scaffolding things like providers and connectors and stores and all that kind of stuff. You just test a bare bones UI. And that's it. Hopefully you found this helpful. I mean, I don't know, how long have I been streaming for? 50 minutes. Just refactoring a little tiny chunk of here. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that goes into doing something like this. And now with this knowledge, hopefully you'll be able to do this way faster than I did in this video. So hopefully this was helpful. I've been Q, you've been wonderful, and I hope you have a great day. Take it easy. Bye.